Asterisk 135 hours remain. Ochako and the others walked through the snowstorm, hours before the light of dawn shone, everyone silent, preparing for the mission ahead. Oi! A voice called through the storm, a dark figure waving his hand in the air. Is that you guys? It's us, babe, Mina called out through the storm to her spiky-haired boyfriend. Ochako immediately turned her head to Mina. Babe. Mina had caught Ochako's glance and shrugged. We're a thing now, Mina said casually as she trotted through the snow. Ochako blinked a few times, comprehending what Mina had just said. What? Ochako yelled, being muffled only by the winds of the storm. Why didn't you tell me this at the apartment? You forced me into telling you. 1. I coerced you into telling me I didn't force you. 2. We had very important things to talk about, so I didn't feel like that was the right time. Mina shrugged. Ochako puffed her cheeks as she continued to walk. At last, Kirishima came into view, standing next to the concrete barriers outlining the construction site. Hey guys, Kirishima said, hugging Mina and pecking her on the lips. Uraraka, it's good to see you. It's been forever. Giving Ochako a hug. How's Midoriya? Doing better than ever, honestly. You know him. Saving people. Getting into trouble, the usual. Ochako said with a weary smile. Kirishima laughed. Saving people even when he should be hidden sounds just like Midoriya. That guy is so manly. Kirishima said with a pointy smile. I wish he wouldn't get into so many weird situations, but I do love him, Ochako said, turning her attention to the construction site. So this is the site my parents are building on, right? The four nodded, also turning their attention to the half-refurbished hospital. The girl and that burly guy said that your parents were building the hospital that held secrets of everything going on. Apparently, it's somewhere underground. We overheard them while on a date. Kirishima said, growing slightly redder in the cheeks than the cold had already made them. Well, that's convenient, Ochako mumbled to herself as she walked into the construction site. The others followed as Ochako inspected the construction work. How can you tell what's what in all this snow? Momo asked as they searched. There are specific things you look for. Slightly raised wood, defects in the patterns of the floor, different feelings of hollow and filled flooring. It applies to outside equipment as well. Ochako rattled off as they got closer to the door of the hospital. In this case, there doesn't seem to be anything unusual outside. This is a pre-built build though. If they have something in a building this old that leads into an underground portion, it's probably going to be under the hospital basement. Ochako mumbled to herself. The others laughed. She definitely was Midoriya's girlfriend. Okay guys, this looks like the emergency room exit, Ochako said, walking in. I may know a bit of construction, but hospitals themselves I'm not too sure. The basement is usually where equipment and nuclear reactors are. If anything, the basement doors are probably near the doctor's offices or the surgery rooms. I've been in the hospital enough to know these kinds of things. Todoroki said, taking lead and walking in first. Everyone looked at Momo. Recognizing their glares, she sighed. Yes, that's a lot to unpack. We'll worry about it later. Let's keep moving, shall we? She said as she followed her boyfriend inside the hospital emergency room. Doesn't look like they've hit this side of the place with refurbishments, have they? Momo asked as they followed Todoroki down the hallways. The hallways were dark and dingy, no light had seen the walls in years. Spiderwebs covered each corner and the sound of old cracking tiles beneath their feet. The roof had missing square holes, dust slowly falling from them. The air cold and icy due to the storm outside, no electricity to power the ancient heating system. It's so dark in here. There aren't many windows, Mina said as she held Kirishima's arm tightly. Everyone, take a flashlight, Momo said, lifting up her shirt to reveal her stomach, pulling out flashlights from her body. The hallways lit up as each of the 5 flashlights shined one by one. Slowly they walked down the hallways, passing patient rooms and check-up areas. Shouldn't this be the emergency room portion of the hospital? Kirishima shivered as they continued down. Shouldn't there be more emergency rooms? They're up ahead, Todoroki said as he pushed aside a blockage of hospital beds. The group continued down the dirty halls, passing even more rooms. A lot of people who come to the emergency room don't usually have an emergency. Just overreactions. Wait, guys, Ochako said, stopping, looking at a pair of metal doors they were walking past. Aren't these elevators? The group turned to stare at what Ochako had pointed out. Sure enough, the metal doors had buttons next to them, each button indicating the directions, with an upward and downward triangle. There, but what about them? They probably don't work, Mina said. However, Ochako shook her head. Maybe not, but these elevators would have been used by the nurses and doctors, right? I'm sure this was a quick and easy way to get to the basement. That's not a bad idea. Let's see what level this hospital elevator goes to then. Hiroshima said, hardening his fist and slamming them together, sparks flying from the impact of his knuckles. Hiroshima grabbed each door, using all of his strength to tear the doors open, pushing past the mechanical locks that kept them closed. The elevators creaked loudly as he forced them open until the doors finally gave, slamming with shrieking noise as each door impacted the side of the elevator. There, open and ready. Suddenly, the group heard another shriek, a distant one, however still able to pierce the eardrums of those in range. Guys, that wasn't metal, Todoroki said as he raised a hand to his head. That was something else. Maybe there are some wires that broke, Hiroshima said, deactivating his hardening. We don't know how stable this elevator is and how much weight it can take, if any at all. But we need to check the buttons to see what floor we can get to. Let me, Ochako said, touching herself to make her float. She pulled herself into the elevator and looked at the buttons. There's a button that says B-1. She called out. But there's no power. Even if it could handle our weight, it wouldn't budge. Then we'll let the elevator fall first, Momo said, lifting up her shirt again. Ochako floated out of the elevator, releasing herself from her zero gravity. There landed multiple 100-pound weights, cracking the floors as they landed out of Momo's stomach. Ochako, if you would, Momo asked. Ochako nodded and zero gravities the 100-pound weights. The weights started to float off the ground. Todoroki and Kirishima each grabbing one. On three. 1, 2, 3. The boys threw the weights as Ochako released. The weights crashed onto the elevator floor, the elevator giving way, and with the constant shriek of metal grinding against itself, the elevator toppled down, revealing a square gigantic hole with large wires leading down a few floors. I thought there was only one basement. Mina said, all staring down into the abyss. Our answers are probably down there. All right, everyone. Let's slide down the wire. The only way forward is downward. Asterisk 133 hours remain. The group landed on the now crashed elevator roof. The elevator had been crushed under its own weight, a small gap between the roof and the elevator door showing. God, it's freezing down here, Mina said, being the first to climb through the gap, the rest the following suit, climbing down the destroyed elevator. Guys, this looks way different from the rest of the hospital. The hallway the group now looked down was much more technologically advanced, with gray tiles with gray walls and accented black designs. However, the largest of the accents were the large, black piping that ran across the floors and roof of the hallways. This is way creepier, Hiroshima responded, as the group slowly started making their way down the hallway. What are all these pipes for? Momo wondered out loud to herself. Suddenly the lights came on in the hallway. Each student prepared themselves for a fight, however, none came. Maybe we should have brought out hero costumes, Ochako said, having had left hers in the backpack she had taken to the apartment. However, Momo shook her head. Even in the snow, if someone saw us in them, it would have blown out cover. It's already bad enough you're still wearing Midoriya's face guard. Guys, you need to see this, said Mina, who was still far ahead. She had walked through the doors at the end of the hallway, staring in horror. The rest of the group walking in after her, each of their eyes growing wide with fear. Tubes. Tubes and glass human-sized containers in every direction, something. Or someone in each and every tube. A supercomputer, large and towering over everything, stood in the center of the room. Is this where the Nomu were being manufactured? Momo asked, putting a hand to her mouth. They must still be manufacturing them. But why here? Why under a hospital? Hiroshima asked. However, his eyes got even wider after thinking for a moment. Oi, each Nomu has a quirk, right? If not multiple. You don't think. If people died or were sick in this hospital, there's no way. Kirishima stopped, unable to continue. Ochako, who had been staring in horror at each tube, remembered what Izuku and the meeting of the Chisaki mission had said about overhaul. He had been experimenting with her. If this was similar, then what were they going to try and do with Hima? The weighted fear in Ochako grew, jumping down from the doors and running towards the computer. Ochako, stop. What are you doing? Todoroki yelled. However, Ochako wasn't listening. The moment she got close to the computer, the screen turned on, revealing schematics for all the Nomu in the room. It seemed touch screen. Ochako swiped through each Nomu case, looking for any trace of Hima, Izuku, or Eri before finally landing on a file with the name Oshagiri, Hima. Her face fell as she tapped on the file. Ochako, what are you? Mina called out as she and the others ran towards Ochako. However, the screen said it all. Countless types of experimental data on Hima had been shown, each and every traumatizing experiment shown in clear detail. Starvation, extreme weather, emotional scaring, each and every one with the goal listed above, progress on natural quirk enhancement, for future Nomu experimental causes. That's why she was in the woods alone. They were testing her quirk survival in extreme conditions. Ochako stuttered in horror. But she didn't know why she was out there. At least, She didn't say anything about this. How could she not remember? How could she not tell us this was happening to her? Oi, there's a file here on Aries experiments too, Kirishima said, looking through another computer screen. They did so much to her. Were they watching over Overhaul's experiments? They have a list of others they wanted. Here's one on Izawa sensei. Some doctor named Garaki got a hold of a body named Oboro Shirakumo. Hey, this is that League of Villain member Kurogiri. He's a Nomu. Kirishima called out in surprise. They wanted Aizawa too, as Izuku in there, Ochako yelled, turning to Kirishima. Kirishima glanced at her in surprise at her outburst before shaking his head and began looking through the computer. No, but there's a lot of mention of All Might, and something called One for All. It's not for Nomu experimentation though. It's for this guy named All for One. Wasn't that the villain All Might beat? Oi, what the hell is this? Quote dot. What is it? Momo asked, walking over to Kirishima. That's Shigaraki. This is his body, isn't it? Kirishima said. Momo looked at the screen. A figure in a tube with a countdown and a percentage gauge was shown on the screen, a list of multiple quirks being what seemed to be added. Momo looked in horror. What are they doing to him? Are they doing surgery? This isn't just the liberation overthrowing the government. This is way worse. Ochako, however, stood in shock. Shigaraki was going through a crazy surgery. Did they want one for all itself and not Izuku? If not for Anomu, then what for? All for one was still in the equation. But wasn't he locked up currently? Is Izuku going to have to fight Shigaraki like this? But Izuku's arms still broke using too much of one for all. It's got a countdown for estimated completion, 132 hours left. There's still time. We have to warn Aizawa. This is way bigger than some liberation thing. There must be something else, though. We're missing needed information on the liberation and other aspects of the League of Villains. We need to know why they want Midoriya. We know why they want those quirk users, at least we think they do with this Nomu revelation. But Midoriya isn't mentioned, so they must want him for something else. Todoroki said, but whoever these guys are, they don't seem to be here. Who are you? Each student froze, slowly turning to see where the voice had come from. A figure, purple, bulky, with a triangular beak, its brain exposed, was towering over from behind them. You are not Master Garaki, or Dr. Asagiri. Who are you? The Nomu and the students stared at each other for a moment before the Nomu's original yellow eyes turned red. The lights on the computer screen grew a deadly red along with blink lights of alarms in the experiment room, a loud beeping noise escaping speakers at each corner of the overly large room. Intruders. Must kill. The Nomu said simply before shrieking violently. Intruders. Must kill. Must kill. The Nomu raised both of his fists, clasping them together to attack the group. Todoroki quickly stepped in front of a mountain of ice, blasting away the Nomu. With a scream, the Nomu and the ice slammed against the wall, the impact shattering multiple containers of glass, releasing more Nomu. Guys, we gotta move. Todoroki yelled. However, a second Nomu had appeared behind him, ready to strike. Kirishima hardened his fist, jumping above Todoroki, punching the rather skinny-looking Nomu in the face, slamming him to the ground. Ochako looked around for the safest exit. However, they were being surrounded by an uncountable number of Nomu. The group of 5 students turned their backs to each other, creating a circle facing each direction of Nomu. Ochako held her hands up ready to fight. Kirishima hardened the rest of his body. Flames and ice started appearing from Todoroki's arms. A pole and a shield were coming out of Momo's arms, and acid dripped from Mina's hands. Looks like their only option was to fight. Asterisk 131 hours remain. A figure stood over the mountain tops, his leather trench coat blowing in the wind, glaring down at what seemed to be a log cabin, half the cabin completely covered in snow, gleaming as the early morning sunlight protruded from the storm clouds. He smiled devilishly. I guess it's time.